This is a video about how we shouldn't underestimate Shallan, who I think is one of the easiest characters to underestimate in the Stormlight Archive. It seems like most of what we're seeing with Shallan is her own personal growth as she overcomes kind of personal and mental challenges, but I think what we're actually seeing with her is cascading and compounding powers, intersection with the Heralds and Heraldic powers, and generational implications of her actions. So let's talk about Shallan. This video will include major spoilers for the Stormlight Archive, so the first 5 books in the Stormlight Archive up through the end of Wind and Truth, but not much else in the Cosmere. Also, if you haven't seen my videos yet, I talk about all things Cosmere, basically. So my different theories in the Cosmere, different character breakdowns, everything Cosmere. So if you like that, please stick around and subscribe. I also am like a YouTube partner now. I don't know what exactly that means, but more to follow. Okay, so let's talk about Shallan's powers. And specifically, I think there's 3 ways that we're seeing her powers cascade and compound over the course of the stories. So what are they? First, and perhaps most obviously, she's a radiant light weaver. But she's not just any radiant light weaver or any radiant. She's a radiant that has bonded 2 separate spren, which really does make her unique in the Stormlight Archive. Those spren are the cryptics known as Testament, who she bonded as a child, and then Pattern, who she bonded later as an adult. And crucially, those bonds, both bonds, still exist, which makes Shallan, as far as we know, the only character in the Stormlight Archive with 2 active Nahel bonds. As a child, Shallan had tried to renounce her bond with Testament after she used Testament to kill her mother, but Pattern later explains in Wind and Truth that that attempt to break that bond failed because, as he puts it, your break, done by a child without full intent, is ragged. In other words, the bond was damaged but not destroyed. Some connection remained. And over the course of Wind and Truth, what I think we're seeing are both bonds strengthening. So what does having like 2 spren even mean? And the short answer is that we don't fully know yet. What we do know is what Kellic, who's a herald, tells Shallan. And what he says is, strange things happen when the Nahel bond is imbricated. There were rules against it once. That's a big warning sign. And my sense, or my theory, is that these 2 Nahel bonds are the things that are allowing Shallan to use what the text calls substantiation. Essentially what it means is giving like real substance to her illusions and then using those illusions to do things, for example, like physically in combat. That means she has, as a light weaver, she has the ability not just to make illusions or make things look real, but actually to make them like functionally real. In Wind and Truth, one of the feuds, that's Abidi the Monarch, notices that Shallan has learned how to use substantiation and describes it as some things that humans had once forbidden themselves from using, which kind of lines up eerily well with Kellic's warning about rules around overlapping bonds or Nahel bonds. And honestly, like I think you can kind of see why this would be banned, because with enough investiture, Shallan could theoretically create like entire armies of like illusions, but illusions with substance, and then like use them in battle. So you have like fake armies fighting. The destructive potential of this like compounded power is enormous. This brings us to layering on another major and unique power ability that Shallan has, which is her special connection or attachment to the spiritual realm, the source of infinite power or investiture. In Chapter 5 of Wind and Truth, Kellic, again, reveals that Shallan has been glimpsing or reaching into the spiritual realm and pulling parts of it in the artwork that she does, in the drawings that she kind of creates. And that's a huge deal. The spiritual realm is a place of, like, effectively infinite investiture. And it's also a place where time doesn't work normally, like past, present, and future, they all kind of exist together. And as we learn, even touching or reaching into the spiritual realm is really rare in the Cosmere. What this suggests is that Shallan's connection, I think, gives her at least some ability to draw from like an endless source of power and sense the future. Caleb kind of confirms this when he asks her how often she's been unconsciously drawing on fortune, which is like the Cosmere term for like glimpsing possible futures. And we've seen Shallan do this before, actually. There are moments throughout the books that we see that she seems to like know outcomes in advance. Like, for example, when she knows that her crew survived the Ghostbloods attack on their ships, like all the way back in the first 2 books. I have a separate video actually breaking that down, so I won't get into it. But the point is that her connection to the spiritual realm is special and gives her some foresight. This isn't random. It's not something that Shallan learned. It's actually generational. And now I'm getting into like, I know I said spoilers earlier, but I'm getting into like really like spoilers because we now know, or we learn in Wind and Truth, that Shallan's mother was a herald, and specifically the Herald Chanarach. And so I think that special connection that she has to the spiritual realm comes from, or was inherited from her mother. To break that down, I think we need to like understand how the heralds were like created in the first place. Ishar explains that the bond that formed the herald, the Oathpact that kind of formed the herald, was drawn from their bond to honor. And using that bond to honor, they were able to tap into the spiritual realm, basically drawing investiture that like locks their souls at their current age, granting them immortality, basically. In other words, the Oathpact is formed in part by this connection to the spiritual realm, which is what I think Shallan inherits from her mother, Chanarach. There's one more trait that I think is unique to Shallan and comes from this heraldic or heraldic inheritance, and that's Shallan's mental illness. We see Shallan experience deep trauma throughout the book. And one of her primary kind of like coping mechanisms is like dissociation, like creating multiple personalities or multiple alters in order to kind of like cope with the trauma that she's had to face. But I don't think this happened in a vacuum. And I think it needs to be put in the context of the herald's own mental illness and mental damage. The heralds, including Shallan's mother, suffer from their own like mental traumas, essentially, which is both, I think, caused by the millennia of torture that they faced, but also, I think, a portion of the Oathpact when they made the oath to quote-unquote hold back the darkness. I think that oath that they swore that made them the heralds have required them, in some sense, to carry a piece of the darkness within themselves as part of holding it back from Roshar. And I think Shallan inherited a piece of that burden. And I think this helps explain why nearly all of the Davar children of Shallan and her siblings as well show signs of mental illness. So there's kind of a lot going on with Shallan. She has 2 active bonds, radiant bonds, something that was forbidden and potentially like extremely destructive. She likely carries a fragment of the Oathpact's, the original Oathpact's legacy through her mother, the Herald Chanarach, granting her both a unique connection to the spiritual realm, access to unlimited investiture, glimpses of the future, along with the mental cost that comes with holding back darkness from Roshar. And all of this comes together as somebody like really quite unique in the Cosmere and certainly on the planet of Roshar. So what does all this mean? What does this like cascading, compounding powers mean? What are the implications? And I think on a personal level, what we're seeing at the end of Wind and Truth is that Shallan may finally have a path towards healing. Kaladin reforges the Oathpact at the end of Wind and Truth, and so it's possible that maybe a fragment of that burden that she's carrying could be like released in some way or reformed in some way as a result of that action that Kaladin takes. But actually, I think the implications are greater than just Shallan's growth. The Oathpact was able to be formed with the people that it was and the way that it was originally, not just because of the Honor's role and influence, but because most of the original heralds had their own connection to Odium from their time on the planet Ashen. So in some ways, the heralds were a function of both Odium and Honor's powers, or like gifts. And that means that any echoes of that Oathpact that Shallan inherits are kind of like inherently tied to both Odium and Honor at the same time, kind of like retribution. And then on top of that, she is pregnant. So we learn in Wind and Truth that she, or maybe it's like strongly implied in Wind and Truth because she like touches her stomach and thinks about how she like needs to survive for more than just herself. It's strongly implied that she is carrying Adolin's child. So that child, in the same way Shallan inherited elements of that Oathpact, that original Oathpact, that child may in turn also inherit elements of that original Oathpact. That could mean that this child inherits heightened access to the spiritual realm, like Shallan, early or maybe unusually strong appetite for surge binding, and a connection to both Honor and Odium combined. Does that mean that that child or children are able to wield pieces of retribution in ways that like no one anticipates? And what does it mean for like continuing generations of humans if they keep inheriting pieces of this Oathpact or bindings to those shards? And so Shallan may not be unique because she's special, but she actually is like maybe the first time that the combined shardic influence of Honor and Odium through the Oathpact has passed into a human lineage outside of like the heralds themselves. And that makes the future for her as well as for her unborn child or children something that we haven't even begun to understand. Okay, so that's Shallan. What do you think? My big takeaway is don't underestimate Shallan. It looks like a personal struggle that she's facing, but it's actually a cosmic struggle, potentially. And I will also link to my other Shallan video that I did when I first started this channel, which honestly, like, I'm still fully bought into in terms of her ability to sense the future. So thanks everyone. If you like this kind of content, please hit like and please subscribe. And as I mentioned, I'm a YouTube partner, which I think means you can be like a member or like have emojis and stuff. I don't really know, but I think there are other ways maybe to support this channel as well. So thank you everyone.